Good morning. Good morning. Some of you will know that there is a group of us here at St. Mark's that is going over to Ridge Oak every Thursday afternoon and offering the Alpha course there. And this week, the topic was, how can I have faith? And then the lessons today are all about faith. 121st Psalm, story of Abraham in Genesis and also in Romans, and then the story of Nicodemus. I think most people, a lot of people, inside and outside of the church, probably think of faith as something that is binary. You either have it or you don't. You got it or you don't. Almost like a light switch. It's either on or it's off. If faith is a light switch, I'd like to say that it's at least a light switch on a dimmer. It at least has a little dynamic play in it. But the metaphor I like better than the light switch, and that I think is used far more often and artfully in the scriptures, is the metaphor of the path, the way, the road, the trail. Yes, you can be on the path or you can be off the path, but the path could also be easy today or it could be grueling today. The path could be uphill and rocky, it could be flat and soft, or it can be downhill and slick. You will know that, some of you, that before Christians were called Christians, we were called the followers of the way. The way. Mark's gospel, our Mark, the author of the first gospel that was written, was probably writing at a time where Christians, many of them, were still being called followers of the way. Over and over and over again in the Greek text of Mark, we have the Greek word hados, which means the way. It's obscured in English translations because English translators get bored saying way, 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 and so they translate it way and road and path and journey, but it's the same word. It's like almost like Mark wanted that drumbeat of way, way, way. Everything in Mark happens on the way. In John's gospel, it becomes even clearer when Jesus says, I am the way. I am the way, the truth, and the life. And ways, paths, trails, roads aren't binary. They're dynamic. Sometimes easy, sometimes hard, sometimes excruciating, sometimes fun, sometimes maddening. I think the patron saint of faith as way is probably St. Peter. His way in the Gospels is incredibly dramatic. He was at work one day, and Jesus comes to his place of employment and says, "Follow me," and he leaves his work and just goes and follows Jesus, leaving everything behind. Midway through Jesus' ministry, Jesus will turn to his disciples and say, "People are saying lots of things about me. Who do you say that I am?" And it's Peter who's like, "You're the Christ. You're the Messiah." And Jesus is like, "Yep, you got it." And then a couple verses later, Peter starts arguing with Jesus because Jesus says he's going to have to suffer and die. And Jesus says, "Get behind me, Satan." In a couple verses, he goes from like the hero who got it to the zero who didn't get it. Towards the end of Jesus' ministry, the Last Supper, Jesus turns to Peter and is like, "You're going to deny me." Peter's like, "I would never do that. A million years." And a couple hours later, he's like, "Jesus? What Jesus? I don't know what Jesus." And then a couple weeks after that, Jesus is preaching to the multitudes, and hundreds of people are brought to faith by his preaching and teaching. I mean, incredibly dramatic story of faith. Sometimes the trail for Peter was easy, and sometimes it was precipitous. Another patron saint of faith as journey would probably be Nicodemus. We don't see as much of Nicodemus as we do of Peter in the Gospels, but if you kind of fill in the blanks, I think what you're left with is a fascinating journey. So we meet Nicodemus today in the 3rd chapter of John. Nicodemus is a religious leader in Israel. He is known, he is learned, he's probably got an impressive title, probably a corner office. He's doing just fine. But he is interested in Jesus, and he goes to him at night. We think he goes to him at night because he didn't want anyone else getting a picture of him with Jesus. That would look bad in the morning's paper, because all of the other religious establishment of Jerusalem was turning against Jesus. But Nicodemus seems legitimately interested in what he has going on. There are other people who go to Jesus and who very clearly seem to be trying to trip him up or trick him or getting him to say the wrong thing. Nicodemus seems sincere in his approach. He's like, you are from God. No one can do the things that you are doing without God. And then, if you notice, Jesus just hammers him. I mean, the poor guy, what Jesus is saying is so blowing his mind that he can't figure it out. Right? Like, what are you talking about being born again? You can only be born once. And Jesus is like, are you a teacher of Israel and you don't understand what I'm saying to you? I mean, Jesus is not gentle with this guy at all. You could almost imagine, being burned in this conversation like Nicodemus is, and Nicodemus just walking away and being like, that's it. Like, I don't need any more of that. But it seems to only fuel his interest in Jesus. We see him a couple of chapters later, in chapter 7, when the rest of the religious leadership of Jerusalem begin to talk about wanting to kill Jesus. Like, we need to end him, we need to get him out of the way. And it's Nicodemus who stands up and says, wait a minute, don't we usually listen to people before we condemn them? Don't we usually allow them to testify on their own behalf before we send them to the gallows? Now, that's not exactly a full-throated, unambiguous agreement with the gospel. He's not saying, yeah, Jesus is right, and I'm really interested. He goes to like procedural grounds. Shouldn't we hear him out? But still, amongst his peers, who are almost united against Jesus, he shows up as the one voice who isn't. And then at the very end of the gospel, we see Nicodemus once more. Nicodemus is with Joseph of Arimathea. They go to collect the bruised, the beaten, bloody body of Jesus, unstuck from the cross. They take his body to a tomb and bury him with dignity. He shows up having questions and getting taken to the woodshed in chapter 3. And by the end of the gospel, he's there caring for Jesus' body. Out in the open for anyone to see. I mean, his peers, his group, his buddies had been the ones who conspired to get Jesus on the cross to begin with. And then he's there taking care of Jesus' body. We don't know what happened between Jesus and Nicodemus in chapter 3 and the end of the gospel, but there was a journey in between those 2 points. There was a path, a way. And I would imagine, just knowing Nicodemus' stature and his place in the community, that it wasn't an easy one. Can you imagine what his friends and colleagues said about him? Can you imagine what his friends and colleagues said to him? That's all we get of Nicodemus in the Scriptures. There are other church traditions about Nicodemus. One of them says that Nicodemus was a secret Christian, that during Jesus' ministry, he was a secret follower. He couldn't be found out by the other religious leaders. Terrible things would happen to him, but quietly he followed the teachings and the way of Jesus. Another interesting tradition says that after the resurrection, Jesus went and moved in with Rabbi Gamaliel. Rabbi Gamaliel was Paul's mentor, another Pharisee. And this tradition says that both Gamaliel and Nicodemus lived out the rest of their lives as followers of the way, as followers of Jesus. Is it true? Maybe. We don't know about that. But it is interesting that these two leaders, very prominent people, Gamaliel and Nicodemus, while they're leaders before, they don't appear to be leaders on the other end of the resurrection. They're not out there founding communities. They're not traveling with Paul, going around establishing churches. They just sort of go off into obscurity, living a quiet life of faith. The gospel isn't about Nicodemus, so we don't get all the details, but the little bits that we get show that this guy lived an interesting path, an interesting way. And wouldn't you like to be him at the end, caring for the body of our Savior? We are almost in the middle of Lent, and we're 2 weeks in, 2.5 weeks in. And Lent is this time where we are meant to sort of examine where we are. And I would suggest that you, using the story of Nicodemus, but also the story of Abraham this morning, examine where you are on your path right now. Like, where are you? Are you on an uphill section? Are you on a downhill section? Are you on a level section? Are you on the path, or are you kind of like on the side of the path? Are you running off somewhere in the woods? Where are you? Perhaps you could think about where you've come from. What has your faith journey been like? What have been the peaks? What have been the valleys? What have been the moments of despair and the moments of joy? And who is it that has walked alongside of you on this path? I think as you look at where you are and where you've been, it might be an opportunity for gratitude. Gratitude for God, but also gratitude for your fellow sojourners. But of course, in Lent, as in faith, we can't just look backwards, we also have to look forwards. And so we could also wonder what the rest of our walk is going to be like. If you've ever been a hiker, you know that unless, I guess, you're walking through the prairie, you don't see much of the trail in front of you. And in fact, what you see of the trail in front of you can be deceiving. You can think, oh, I'm almost there, and then you're not. And then, like, I'm at the top. Oh, nope, there's more. Last night, after the 5 o'clock service, we got talking about this, and people saying that they could only see day by day. so much is going on in life that it's just step by step and day by day. And that's good, as long as we keep taking a step by step, day by day. As a priest, I have a typical conversation with people in the community when I'm out and about, and especially when I'm in uniform. Someone will come up to me and they'll go, "Are you the priest at St. Mark's, or years ago, are you the priest at that church downtown?" And I go, "Yeah." And they'll go, "I was baptized there." And I'll be like, "I have never seen you." And kind of what I want to say is, "Well, where have you been?" But I'm just not that confrontative, and so I'll say, "Well, we're around on Sundays at 10 a.m., right?" Faith is not a light switch that you turn on, 20, 30 years ago, and you just keep it going. If faith is a relationship with God, every relationship requires work. If you're in a marriage and you just stop working on the relationship, it's over. If you're in a friendship and you just stop working on the friendship, it's over. If the only thing I can tell you about my relationship with my wife is that we were married on June 24th, 2000, then there's no relationship there. Each day requires a step, and some days it will be uphill. And some days it will be downhill, but slick and treacherous. And some days it will be level and soft. But the way we trod is an old, worn trail. It was trod on by Abraham and Nicodemus and Paul and the people who built this church and set up a mission here in Basking Ridge, and by you. Keep walking. Amen.